The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, carried by a dust-covered rider who looked half dead from the journey across the Wyoming Territory. Silas Boone watched from his porch as the man approached, his weathered hands tightening around his coffee mug. Mail was rare out here, 40 miles from the nearest town of Willow Creek, and it usually meant either death or trouble. "Silas Boone." The rider's voice cracked like old leather. "That's me." The envelope was thick, sealed with wax that had partially melted in the heat. Silas recognized the handwriting immediately. Jeremiah Wall, his old army buddy from the Indian Wars. They'd served together at Fort Laramie, survived ambushes that killed better men, and shared whiskey over too many campfires to count. He waited until the rider disappeared over the ridge before breaking the seal. The morning sun beat down mercilessly, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out its lonely song. Silas, I hope this letter finds you well, though knowing you, you're probably still living like a hermit on that godforsaken ranch. I'm writing because I've got a situation that needs handling, and you're the only man I trust with it. Her name is Clara May Henderson. She's 23, from Missouri, and she needs a husband before you throw this letter in the fire. Hear me out. She's not some saloon girl or desperate widow. She's quality. Silas, educated, knows her letters and numbers, can keep house better than most. Her father was a minister before the fever took him. She's had some troubles. I won't lie to you. Bad marriage that ended when her husband took a bullet in a card game, no fault of hers. She needs a fresh start, somewhere far from Missouri and all its ghosts. I told her about you, about your ranch, about how you're the most honest man I know despite everything we've done. She'll be on the stage coming through Cheyenne on the 15th of this month. That gives you 2 weeks to decide. If you're there to meet her, she's yours. If not, she'll continue west to California. I know what you're thinking. You're no good for any decent woman. But Silas, we both know that's horse manure. You've paid for your sins 10 times over. Maybe it's time to stop punishing yourself and start living. Your friend. Jeremiah. Peace. She's pretty, if that matters. Not in a flashy way, but in the way that grows on a man. Silas read the letter 3 times before folding it carefully and tucking it into his shirt pocket. A mail-order bride. The very idea seemed absurd. Women were scarce as rain in August out here, and the few who ventured this far west were usually running from something or towards something equally dangerous. He thought of his mother, dead these past 2 winters. She'd always pestered him about finding a wife, giving her grandchildren before she passed. "You weren't meant to be alone, Silas," she'd said, her voice already weak from the consumption that would take her. Even wolves run in packs. 2 weeks. He had 2 weeks to decide if he wanted to meet this Clara May Henderson, this minister's daughter who'd already buried 1 husband. Part of him wanted to saddle up right now and ride in the opposite direction. The other part, the part that woke him at night with memories of blood and gun smoke, wondered if Jeremiah was right. Maybe it was time to stop punishing himself. The ranch sprawled around him. 400 acres of good grazing land backed up against the foothills of the Rockies. He'd built it up from nothing. Every fence post driven by his own hands. Every head of cattle earned through honest work. It was a good life, a quiet life. But Lord, it was lonely. The only voices he heard most days were the wind and his own thoughts, and neither made for pleasant company. The morning of the 15th found Silas standing on the platform in Cheyenne, feeling like a fool in his only good shirt. He'd trimmed his beard, beaten the dust from his hat, and even paid 2 bits for a proper bath at the hotel. Around him, the station bustled with life soldiers heading to Fort Russell, merchants hawking their wares, painted ladies trying to catch the eye of lonely travelers. The stage was late. Of course it was late. Stages were always late, especially coming through Indian territory. Silas tried not to think about all the things that could delay a coach, from broken wheels to Apache raids. He'd seen too many burned-out wagons in his scouting days. Too many shallow graves marked with nothing but rocks. "You waiting on someone special?" The voice belonged to a drummer in a checkered suit, clearly hoping to make conversation. Silas gave him a look that could freeze water in July, and the man quickly found somewhere else to be. Then he heard it, the jingle of harness, the creak of wheels, the driver's whip cracking over the team's heads. The stage rolled into view, covered in alkali dust so thick it looked like it had been painted white. The horses were lathered with sweat, their sides heaving as the driver hauled back on the reins. "Cheyenne, all out for Cheyenne." Passengers began climbing down a cavalry officer, 2 miners, a woman in widow's weeds who looked old enough to be his grandmother. Then, last of all, a slight figure in a brown traveling dress, moving carefully as if the ground might shift beneath her feet. Clara May Henderson. She was smaller than he'd expected, barely coming up to his shoulder. Her hair was the color of autumn leaves, pulled back in a simple bun that had lost its battle with the journey. Dust covered her from head to toe, but she held herself with a quiet dignity that made the dirt seem like an afterthought. Their eyes met across the platform, and Silas felt something shift in his chest. She had green eyes, the color of sage after rain, and they held a wariness he recognized. It was the look of someone who'd learned not to trust too quickly, who'd discovered that the world had teeth and liked to bite. He removed his hat and stepped forward. "Miss Henderson." "Yes." Her voice was soft but steady. "Mr. Boone." "Yes, ma'am." He reached for her carpet bag, and she surrendered it after only a moment's hesitation. It was heavier than it looked, and he wondered what a woman would carry across half the continent. "How was your journey?" "Long." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "But I've had worse." There was a story there, but Silas didn't push. They had time for stories later. Right now, he needed to get her to the hotel where he'd reserved a room separate from his own. Of course, they'd be married tomorrow by the circuit judge, assuming she didn't take one look at his scarred hands and rough ways and decide California sounded better after all. "I've got us rooms at the Regent," he said, leading her away from the platform. "Thought you might want to rest up before tomorrow." "Tomorrow." She repeated the word like she was tasting it. "Yes, I suppose tomorrow we'll be married." The matter-of-fact way she said it caught him off guard. Most women, he imagined, would want something more romantic than a business arrangement conducted through letters and intermediaries. But Clara May Henderson seemed to understand what this was: 2 damaged people trying to build something from the wreckage of their lives. "I'm not much for speeches," Silas said as they walked. "But I want you to know I'll do right by you. You'll have a home, food on the table, protection from anyone who might cause you trouble. I don't drink overmuch, don't gamble, and I've never raised a hand to a woman in my life." She stopped walking and looked up at him, those green eyes searching his face for something truth, maybe, or just the absence of cruelty. "And what do you want from me, Mr. Boone?" The question hung between them like morning mist. What did he want? Company someone to share the burden of the ranch, a warm body in his bed. All of those things, and none of them seemed like the right answer. "Honestly," he met her gaze straight on, "I don't rightly know. I suppose I'm tired of talking to cattle and chickens, tired of eating my own cooking, tired of waking up to nothing but wind and memories." He paused, then added, "Jeremiah said you needed a fresh start. Well, so do I. Maybe we can figure out the rest as we go." Something in her face softened. "That's the first honest thing a man said to me in years." She resumed walking, her stride a little more confident. "Very well, Mr. Boone. Tomorrow we'll be married, and then we'll see what comes of it." The Regent Hotel was the finest Cheyenne had to offer, which wasn't saying much, but it was clean. And the sheets didn't have too many holes, and the restaurant downstairs served beef that was only a little tough. Silas left Clara to freshen up and went to find the judge to confirm tomorrow's appointment. Judge Franklin Pierce, named after the president, though he claimed no relation was holding court in the back room of the Silver Dollar Saloon. He was a thin man with the face of an underfed buzzard, but he was legally empowered to perform marriages, and that was all that mattered. "Ah, Mr. Boone." The judge didn't look up from his cards. 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. "Correct." "Yes, sir." "And the bride, she's arrived safely?" "She has—" "Good, good." The judge finally met his eyes. "You know, Boone, I've married a lot of couples out here. Cowboys and saloon girls, minors and widows. All sorts of arrangements that wouldn't pass muster back east. Some work out, some don't. The ones that do usually have one thing in common: they're honest with each other from the start. No fairy tales, no pretending. Just two people trying to make a life in a hard country. I appreciate the advice. Judge, free of charge." The judge returned to his cards. "Though I'll expect $2 tomorrow for the ceremony." That evening, Silas knocked on Clara's door to escort her to dinner. She'd managed to wash off most of the trail dust and changed into a blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes. She looked younger, more vulnerable, and Silas felt a protective instinct rise in him that he quickly tamped down. She didn't need his protection. Not yet. She needed his respect. The restaurant was crowded with the usual mix of cowboys, businessmen, and travelers passing through. More than a few eyes followed them to their table, and Silas knew they were wondering about the unlikely pair, the scarred gunman and the pretty Eastern woman. They ordered beef and potatoes, because that was all the kitchen really did well, and ate in companionable silence for a while. Finally, Clara set down her fork and looked at him. "Jeremiah told me you were in the wars." "I was." "He said you were a scout, that you saved his life more than once." "He saved mine just as often." She nodded, seeming to file that away. "I won't ask about the things you've done. Mr. Boone, we all have our ghosts, but I need to know, are you running from the law? Will men with badges come looking for you?" It was a fair question. "No, ma'am. Everything I did was in uniform or in self-defense. I've got no paper on me, no bounties. Some folks might not like me much, but the law's got no claim." "Good." She took a sip of water. "I've had enough of violence, Mr. Boone. I know it's part of life out here, but I won't live in fear in my own home. I won't." There was steel in her voice, and Silas respected her more for it. "You won't have to, I promise you that." They finished their meal, and Silas walked her back to her room. At the door, she turned to face him, worrying her bottom lip between her teeth. Tomorrow night, after we're married?" She stopped, color flooding her cheeks. "There's no rush for anything," Silas said quietly. "We'll take things as they come. You'll have your own room at the ranch until you decide different." Relief flickered across her face. "Thank you." He touched the brim of his hat. "Good night, Miss Henderson. I'll see you in the morning." "Good night, Mr. Boone." He was halfway down the hall when her voice stopped him. "Silas." He turned. She was still standing in her doorway, backlit by the lamp in her room. "Thank you for being here, for meeting the stage. I know this isn't what either of us planned for our lives, but thank you." He nodded, not trusting his voice, and continued down the hall. In his own room, he sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out Jeremiah's letter one more time. Tomorrow he'd be a married man. Tomorrow he'd take responsibility for another person's happiness, something he'd sworn never to do after the things he'd seen and done. But looking back at the slight figure in the doorway, those wary green eyes that had seen their own share of sorrow, he thought maybe Jeremiah was right. Maybe it was time to stop punishing himself. Maybe two broken people could build something whole. Outside his window, the Wyoming moon rose full and bright, painting the town in silver and shadow. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and its pack answered, their voices carrying across the empty miles. Even wolves run in packs, his mother had said. Tomorrow, Silas Boone would no longer run alone. The ranch house squatted low against the horizon like a wary animal, its weathered boards the color of old bones. Clara gripped the edge of the wagon seat as they crested the final hill, her new wedding band catching the afternoon light. They'd been married that morning in Judge Pierce's cramped office, the ceremony lasting all of 5 minutes. Now, 6 hours later, she was seeing her new home for the first time. "It ain't much," Silas said, his voice carrying an undertone of apology. "But it's solid. Built it myself, mostly." Clara studied the structure with practical eyes. Single story, with a covered porch running along the front, a stone chimney rose from one end, and glass windows, real glass. Not oiled paper reflected the endless sky. To the left stood a barn and several outbuildings. To the right, a small grove of cottonwoods that suggested water nearby. "It's more than I expected," she said honestly. "You have glass windows." "Freighted them in from Denver last year. Cost a fortune, but winter gets mighty cold up here." He pulled the team to a stop in front of the house. "Gets lonely, too." The inside was exactly what she'd anticipated from a bachelor's dwelling, functional, sparse, and showing a distinct lack of feminine influence. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a massive stone fireplace dominating one wall. A rough-hewn table occupied the center, surrounded by 4 mismatched chairs. Shelves held supplies in no particular order, and a layer of dust covered most surfaces. "Your room's through there." Silas indicated a door to the left. "Mine's on the other side. There's a necessary outback and a washroom attached to the kitchen, spring-fed, so the water runs clear even in drought." Clara set her carpetbag down and moved to the kitchen area. A good stove. She noted with relief a majestic range that must have cost dear, cast-iron pans hung from hooks, most showing signs of hard use and inadequate cleaning. The pantry held basics: flour, salt, coffee, beans, salt pork, bachelor fare. "I'll need supplies from town," she said, running a finger along a dusty shelf. "Proper supplies for cooking, cleaning, seeds for a garden, if it's not too late in the season." "Make a list. I'll ride to Willow Creek tomorrow." He shifted uncomfortably, hat in hand. "I'll bed down in the barn tonight. Give you time to settle in." "Mr. Boone Silas." She turned to face him. "This is your home. I won't have you sleeping with the horses on my account." "It's no trouble." "It's foolishness." She smoothed her skirts, a gesture he was beginning to recognize as her way of gathering courage. "We're married now. In the eyes of God and law, I trust you to keep your word about taking things slowly. You don't need to exile yourself to prove it." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but if you change your mind, if you need—" "I'll speak up. I may be shy, Mr. Boone, but I'm not mute." A ghost of a smile crossed his weathered face. "No, ma'am, I don't believe you are." That first evening set the pattern for the days that followed. Clara threw herself into the work of making the house livable with an energy that surprised them both. She scrubbed floors, washed windows, reorganized the pantry with military precision. Silas watched from a safe distance, occasionally offering help that was either accepted or politely declined, depending on her mood. The first real meal she cooked, a simple stew with fresh biscuits, nearly brought tears to his eyes. He'd been living on beans, salt pork, and badly made coffee for so long he'd forgotten food could taste like comfort. "Where did you learn to cook?" he asked, sopping up the last of the gravy with his third biscuit. "My mother, before she passed, then the sisters at St. Mary's Academy." She paused, her spoon halfway to her mouth. "After that, I cooked for my late husband. He was particular about his meals." The way she said particular told Silas more than any lengthy explanation could have. He'd known men who were particular about things, usually with their fists. "Well," he said carefully. I'm grateful for anything that doesn't come out of a can or require me to shoot it first. She smiled then, a real smile that transformed her face. That's a low bar to clear, Mr. Boone. Silas, he corrected. And maybe it is, but you've cleared it with room to spare. As the days passed, they developed a careful dance of domesticity. Clara rose with the sun to start breakfast, while Silas tended the stock. They ate together, discussing the day's tasks with the formality of business partners. He would ride out to check the herd or mend fences. She would attack another corner of the house or work in the garden plot she'd claimed behind the kitchen. Evenings were the hardest. After supper, they would sit by the fire, the silence broken only by the pop of burning wood and the wind rattling the windows. Sometimes Clara would read from the Bible or one of the few books Silas owned. Sometimes he would clean his guns or mend tack. Always, there was a careful distance between them, as if they were afraid that closing the gap might shatter something fragile. One evening, about 2 weeks after her arrival, Clara looked up from her sewing to find Silas watching her. What is it? She touched her hair self-consciously. Do I have a smudge? No, ma'am. I was just thinking. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? He considered the question. Someone harder. Maybe, or broken. Jeremiah said you'd had troubles, and women who answer advertisements for mail-order brides usually. He trailed off, color rising above his beard. Usually are desperate. Clara finished. Well, I am, but desperation doesn't mean destruction. Mr. Boone Silas, sometimes it just means you're willing to take a chance on something different. Is that what this is, a chance? She set down her sewing and met his eyes. What else could it be? You needed a wife. I needed a husband and a home. We're both taking a chance that we can build something from that foundation. And if we can't, then we'll face that when it comes. But I don't believe in borrowing trouble from tomorrow when today has plenty of its own. It was the most she'd said at one time since arriving, and Silas found himself hungry for more. You sound like my mother. She was always saying things like that. Tell me about her. So he did. He told her about Mary Lincoln Boone, who'd come west as a young bride and carved a life from nothing but determination and faith. How she'd run the homestead alone while his father fought in the Mexican War. How she'd faced down claim jumpers with nothing but a shotgun and steady nerves. How she'd lived to see the ranch established, but not to see it prosper. She would have liked you, he said finally. Would have been glad to see a woman's touch in this place again. Clara's hand moved as if to reach for his, then settled back in her lap. I hope I can live up to her memory. You already have. She'd have appreciated how you've tackled this place, like a cavalry charge. Minus the sabers and gunfire, I hope. Definitely minus those. They smiled at each other across the space between their chairs, and for the first time, it didn't feel like such a vast distance. The next morning brought the season's first real cold snap. Clara woke to frost on the windows and her breath visible in the air. She dressed quickly, shivering, and hurried to start the fire in the main room. Silas was already up, adding wood to the stove. Cold caught us early this year. He said, I'll need to bring in more wood. Check the chinking between the logs. Winter up here isn't kind to the unprepared. What can I do to help? He looked surprised. Most of it's heavy work. Silas Boone, I may be small, but I'm not made of glass. What needs doing? By the end of the day, they'd worked side by side to prepare the house for winter. Clara helped mix new chinking from clay and straw, stuffing it between logs where the old had cracked. She sorted and stored the vegetables from her garden, hanging herbs to dry from the rafters. When Silas split wood, she stacked it, her arms aching but her spirit oddly light. You're stronger than you look, he commented, watching her hoist another armload. Necessity is a good teacher. She brushed wood chips from her apron. My father used to say that God helps those who help themselves, but he helps them faster if they're already working. Smart man. Your father. He was... Her voice softened with memory. He would have liked this place. The openness of it, the honesty. He always said cities made men forget who they were, but the frontier stripped everything down to what mattered. What matters to you, Clara? The question hung in the air between them. She set down the wood she was carrying and really looked at him, this scarred, lonely man who'd offered her shelter without knowing anything beyond her name and her need. Safety, she said finally. Purpose, the chance to build something that lasts, what matters to you. Used to be survival. Then it was solitude. Now... He gestured toward the house, the land, her. Now I'm not so sure. Maybe that's a good thing. That night, as had become their custom, they sat by the fire after supper. But something had shifted during their day of shared labor. The silence felt companionable rather than strained. When Clara picked up her sewing, she chose the chair closer to his. When Silas reached for a book, he angled it so she could see the pages if she wished. What are you reading? She asked. Caesar's Commentaries, in Latin, helps keep my mind sharp. He glanced at her. Do you read Latin? A little. The sisters taught us. They said education was wasted on women. But God's language should be available to all his children. Would you... He hesitated, then held out the book. Would you like to read with me? My pronunciation's probably terrible. Haven't had anyone to correct me since school. She moved her chair closer still, until their shoulders almost touched. I'd like that. They read together until the fire burned low, taking turns with passages, gently correcting each other's pronunciation. It was the closest they'd been since their wedding day. And Clara found herself aware of small things, the way his hand dwarfed the book. The smell of leather and wood smoke that clung to him. The careful way he turned pages as if the book were precious. When they finally retired, Silas paused at her door. Clara. Yes. Thank you for today, for... He gestured helplessly. For making this place feel less empty. She looked up at him. This bear of a man who could probably snap her in two, but handled books like treasures and gave her space to breathe. It's not empty, Silas. It just needed someone to help you see what was already here. He nodded, throat working as if words were fighting to escape. But in the end, he simply touched his forehead in a little salute and retreated to his own room. Clara closed her door and leaned against it, heart beating faster than it should. She'd come here looking for safety, for escape from the shadows of her past. She hadn't expected to find gentleness in such a rough package. Hadn't expected to feel whatever this fluttering in her chest meant. Outside, the Wyoming wind howled around the corners of the house. But inside, for the first time in years, Clara May Boone felt warm. The road to Willow Creek wound through sagebrush and scattered juniper, following the contours of the land like a dusty snake. Clara sat beside Silas on the wagon seat, her hands folded carefully in her lap, trying not to show her nervousness. This would be her first time in town as Mrs. Boone, and she knew how small towns could be about newcomers, especially mail-order brides. It's not much of a town, Silas said, perhaps sensing her tension. General store, saloon, church, schoolhouse. Doc Edison has an office above the barber shop. That's about it. It's more than where I grew up. Clara replied, We had a church and a store, and that was all. The doctor was 3 towns over. They crested a rise, and Willow Creek spread before them a collection of weathered buildings huddled against the immensity of the Wyoming sky. Smoke rose from chimneys, and she could see people moving along the main street, their figures small as ants from this distance. Clara, Silas said quietly, there might be talk. About me, about us. I've got a reputation in these parts, and not all of it's pleasant. She looked at him, studying his profile against the morning light. Because of the war. The war. And what came after? I did some bounty hunting. Brought in some men who had friends. And there was... He paused, jaw tightening. There was an incident. About 3 years back, man named Theodore Roosevelt, no relation to the New York politician, thought he could push out the smaller ranchers, take their water rights. I disagreed. What happened? He's buried in the town cemetery, along with 2 of his hired guns. His hands tightened on the reins. It was self-defense, all legal and proper, but his widow still lives in town. Martha Roosevelt. She's got influence and a long memory. Clara absorbed this information, adding it to the growing picture of the man she'd married. Thank you for telling me. Forewarned is forearmed, as my father used to say. The town's main street was busy for a Saturday morning. Ranchers had come in for supplies, their wives eager for social contact and gossip. Clara felt eyes on them from the moment they entered town, curious gazes following their progress down the street. Silas pulled up in front of Harriet Beecher's general store, a 2-story building that seemed to sell everything from flour to farm equipment. He helped Clara down from the wagon, his hands gentle but impersonal around her waist. Mrs. Beecher runs the store with her nephew. John Brown folks call him J.B. to avoid confusion with the abolitionist. They're fair people, won't cheat you. He pulled a leather pouch from his pocket. Get whatever you need for the house. I need to see the blacksmith about some horseshoes. Then I'll meet you back here. Clara watched him walk away, noting how people stepped aside to let him pass, how conversations dimmed in his wake. Then she squared her shoulders and entered the store. The interior was dim after the bright morning sun, packed with goods from floor to ceiling. The smell of coffee, leather, and pickles filled her nose. Behind the counter stood a woman in her 50s, steel gray hair pulled back severely, sharp eyes that missed nothing. You'd be the new Mrs. Boone, the woman said without preamble. Heard Silas went and got himself a mail-order bride. I'm Clara Boone, yes. Clara kept her voice steady. And you must be Mrs. Beecher. That I am. The woman studied her like she was pricing goods. You're prettier than I expected. Younger, too. Silas must be pushing 40. Age is just a number, Mrs. Beecher. Character is what counts. The woman's expression softened slightly. What can I help you with today? Clara pulled out her carefully written list. I need quite a few things. We're setting up housekeeping properly. As Mrs. Beecher gathered items, other women drifted into the store. Clara recognized the careful orchestration word had spread that the new Mrs. Boone was in town, and everyone wanted a look. She kept her composure, answering polite questions with polite responses, neither encouraging nor discouraging their curiosity. Where are you from, Mrs. Boone? Asked a young woman with a baby on her hip. Missouri, originally. And how did you meet Silas? This from an older woman with calculating eyes. Through mutual friends. Clara selected a bolt of calico, running her fingers over the fabric. Mrs. Beecher, I'd like 4 yards of this, please. Must have been quite a shock, the older woman persisted. Coming from civilization to, well, to Silas Boone's ranch. Clara turned to face her questioner directly. On the contrary, I find the ranch quite civilized. My husband is a gentleman, the land is beautiful, and I have everything I need. What more could a woman ask for? A husband who hasn't killed 6 men might be a start, a harsh voice said from the doorway. The store went silent. A woman in expensive morning dress stood framed in the entrance, her face bitter as winter wind. Clara didn't need an introduction to know this was Martha Roosevelt. Mrs. Roosevelt. Mrs., Beecher said carefully. I didn't expect to see you today. I came to see what kind of woman would marry a murderer. Her eyes raked over Clara with undisguised contempt. You must be either desperate or foolish. Which is it? Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her voice level. I'm neither Mrs. Roosevelt. I'm simply a woman who married a man I believe to be honorable. Honorable, The widow laughed, a sound like breaking glass. He shot my Theodore in cold blood, shot him down in the street like a dog. That's not true, Martha, and you know it. Mrs. Beecher's voice carried unexpected steel. Your Theodore came to the Boone Ranch with 5 armed men, threatening to burn it down if Silas didn't sell. He drew first, and there were witnesses. Witnesses he intimidated into lying. Clara stepped forward. Mrs. Roosevelt, I'm sorry for your loss, truly, but I won't stand here and listen to you slander my husband. If you have nothing civil to say, perhaps you should leave. The widow's face flushed purple. How dare you? She dares because she's right. The male voice came from behind Martha Roosevelt. A tall man in a sheriff's badge stepped into view, his expression firm but not unkind. Martha, we've been through this. The shooting was investigated and ruled self-defense. It's time to let it go. I'll never let it go. Sheriff Grant, never. She turned her venomous gaze back to Clara. Watch yourself. Mrs. Boone, your husband brought death once. He'll bring it again. Men like him always do. She swept out, leaving a wake of uncomfortable silence. Clara found her hands were trembling and clasped them together to still them. Don't pay her any mind, Sheriff Grant said. Griefs made her bitter. Theodore wasn't the saint she makes him out to be. He was a bully who finally pushed the wrong man. Thank you, Sheriff. Ulysses Grant, no relation to the general, though I served under him at Vicksburg. He tipped his hat. Welcome to Willow Creek, Mrs. Boone. Your husband's a hard man, but he's honest. That counts for something out here. After the sheriff left, the atmosphere in the store shifted. The women, who'd been standoffish before, now seemed more sympathetic. Martha Roosevelt's had the run of this town too long, muttered J.B. Brown from behind a stack of grain sacks. About time someone stood up to her. That was well done, Mrs. Beecher agreed, wrapping Clara's purchases. You've got backbone. You'll need it. Married to Silas Boone. Clara was loading her packages into the wagon when Silas returned, a thunderous expression on his face. I heard what happened, he said without preamble. Martha Roosevelt had no right. She's a grieving widow, Clara interrupted, and I handled it. He stared at her. You handled it. Did you think I'd run crying at the first harsh word? She arranged the packages more securely. I told you, Silas, I may be shy, but I'm not weak. Something in his expression shifted. No, he said slowly. No, you're not. He helped her onto the wagon seat, his hands lingering a moment longer than necessary. What did you think of Sheriff Grant? He seemed fair. He defended you. Grant's a good man. Seen too much war to have much patience for petty feuds. He clicked to the horses. Did Martha say anything else? She warned me that you'd bring death again, that men like you always do. Silas's jaw tightened. Maybe she's right. Maybe she's wrong. Clara looked straight ahead. I judge men by their actions, not their reputations. So far, all I've seen from you is kindness and restraint. They rode in silence for several minutes before Silas spoke again. Theodore Roosevelt came to the ranch with 5 men, said I was sitting on prime land, wasting it on a small herd when he could run thousands of head, offered to buy me out for 1/10 what it was worth. When I refused, he said he'd burn me out, starting with the house. What did you do? Told him to get off my land. He drew on me. Silas's voice was flat, emotionless. He was fast, but I was faster. His men went for their guns, too. When the smoke cleared, 3 were dead. 2 were running, and 1 was on the ground begging for mercy. Did you give it to him? I did. Let him go back to town. Tell everyone what happened. Roosevelt had pushed out 2 other ranchers already. Families with children. Someone had to stop him. Clara reached over and placed her hand on his arm. And someone did. He looked down at her hand as if it were a foreign object. "You're not afraid of me. Should I be?" "Most women would be. Most women are." "I'm not most women. Silas Boone, I thought we'd established that." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "No, Mrs. Boone. You surely are not." The rest of the ride passed peacefully, but Clara noticed Silas scanning the horizon more than usual, his hand never far from his rifle. The encounter with Martha Roosevelt had stirred something, reminded them both that the past had a way of reaching into the present with bloody fingers. As they pulled up to the ranch house, Clara made a decision. "Silas, tell me about the other men, the ones from your bounty hunting days. I'd rather hear it from you than from the next bitter widow we meet in town." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, as he helped her down from the wagon, he nodded. "Tonight, after supper, I'll tell you all of it." But Clara, "Yes, you might not like what you hear. The man he wasn't kind." She looked up at him, this scarred warrior who handled her like spun glass, who read Caesar in Latin and slept in the barn rather than frighten her. "The man you were isn't the man you are, but I'll listen. Silas, to all of it." That evening, after a quiet supper, he told her about the men he'd tracked through desert and mountain, about gunfights in dirty saloons and ambushes in box canyons, about choices made in split seconds that haunted him for years. Clara listened without interrupting, watching the shadows play across his face in the firelight. When he finished, the fire had burned low. Clara rose and added another log, then surprised them both by taking the chair next to his instead of returning to her usual spot. "Thank you," she said simply, "for trusting me with this. It doesn't change how you see me." "It does," she admitted, and saw him flinch. "It makes me see you more clearly, not as a killer, but as a man who's carried terrible burdens, who's tried to build something clean and good despite the blood on his hands." He turned to look at her, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she saw moisture in his eyes. "Clara, Shh." She reached out, hesitated, then placed her hand over his. "We both have our ghosts. Silas, maybe together, we can find a way to live with them." His hand turned under hers, fingers interlacing carefully, as if he was afraid she might shatter. They sat that way until the fire died to embers, two damaged souls finding comfort in the simple act of human touch. Outside, the Wyoming wind sang its eternal song, but inside the small ranch house, something new was beginning to grow, something that might, given time and tenderness, bloom into the kind of love that could heal even the deepest wounds. The storm announced itself with a drop in pressure that made old wounds ache. Silas stood on the porch, watching the northern horizon where clouds piled up like gray mountains. The cattle were restless, bunching together in the lee of the hills, and the horses nickered nervously in the barn. "How bad?" Clara asked from the doorway, drying her hands on her apron. "Bad enough." He could smell snow on the wind, that metallic tang that promised serious weather. "Could be 3 days, maybe 4. I need to get the stock into the near pasture, closer to shelter." She nodded, already thinking ahead. "I'll start cooking. We'll need food that'll keep if we lose the stove, and I'll fill every container with water before the pump freezes." He turned to look at her, this slip of a woman who'd faced down Martha Roosevelt without flinching. In the 2 months since that day in town, she'd proven herself over and over mending fences alongside him, helping with difficult calving, never complaining about the isolation or the hard work. "Clara," he started, then stopped. The words he wanted to say, needed to say, stuck in his throat like always. "Go," she said softly. "Get the animals safe. We'll have time to talk when you're done." By the time he returned, the wind was howling like a living thing, driving snow horizontal across the yard. He could barely see the barn from the house, and that was only 30 yards. His hands were numb despite the thick gloves, and ice clustered in his beard. Clara met him at the door with a blanket and hot coffee. The animals. Safe as I can make them. The horses are in the barn, cattle in the sheltered draw. He let her help him out of his frozen coat. This is going to be a big one. She'd been busy while he was gone. Extra wood stacked by the fireplace. Blankets and quilts piled ready. Food prepared and covered. The house felt like a fortress against the storm, warm and secure. I moved some of my things into the main room, she said, color touching her cheeks. If we lose heat in the bedrooms, it would be safer to sleep by the fire. He nodded, trying not to think about the implications of sharing sleeping space. They'd maintained careful boundaries these past months, their growing closeness expressed in small gestures, a touch of hands. Sitting closer by the fire, conversations that ran deep into the night, but they'd never... That's sensible, he managed. This kind of storm can kill. We need to be smart. By nightfall, the blizzard had become a white fury that shook the house and screamed through every crack. Snow piled against the windows, turning them into blank white eyes. The temperature dropped so fast that frost formed on the inside walls, and their breath came out in clouds despite the roaring fire. Clara had made a nest of blankets near the hearth, and they sat together, sharing warmth and watching the flames. She'd brought out her Bible, but her hands trembled too much to turn the pages. Cold, he asked. A little. Her teeth chattered on the words. Without thinking, he opened his arms. Come here. She hesitated only a moment before moving into his embrace, fitting against his side like she belonged there. He pulled a blanket around them both, creating a cocoon of warmth. Better. Much. Her voice was muffled against his chest. You're like a furnace. Always run hot. Used to drive my mother crazy in summer. They sat quietly for a while, listening to the storm rage. Then Clara spoke, so softly he almost missed it. Silas, there's something I need to tell you. About my first marriage. He felt her tense against him. You don't have to. Yes, I do. You've been honest with me about your past. You deserve the same. She took a shuddering breath. His name was Thomas Jefferson, not the president, obviously. Thomas Jefferson Hartley. My father arranged the marriage when I was 17. Said Thomas was a good Christian man who'd take care of me. Her fingers twisted in the blanket. He was particular about everything. How I dressed, how I spoke, who I could talk to. At first, I thought he was just protective. Then I thought maybe I was doing things wrong, not being a good enough wife. Silas held her closer, feeling the tremors running through her small frame. The first time he hurt me was 3 months after our wedding. I'd burned the biscuits. She laughed, a broken sound. Such a small thing, but he was so angry, said I'd embarrassed him, made him look bad, that I needed to learn. Clara, let me finish, please. If I don't say it now, I never will. She pulled back enough to look up at him, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. It got worse after that. Everything I did was wrong. Too friendly with the shopkeeper. Too slow with dinner. Too resistant in our marriage bed. Silas's hands clenched involuntarily, and she felt it. Don't, she whispered. He's dead. Shot in a card game, like Jeremiah told you. But Silas, that's not the whole truth. What do you mean? He was shot in a card game, yes, but it wasn't over cards. She closed her eyes. There was a woman, a saloon girl named Mary Todd. Thomas had been visiting her. Her man found out, called him out. Thomas was drunk, slow. He died in the dirt outside the Broken Spoke Saloon. And God forgive me, I was glad. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the howling wind and crackling fire. The worst part, Clara continued, was our wedding night. I was so young, so innocent. I knew what happened between men and women in theory. But Thomas, he wasn't gentle, wasn't patient. He took what he wanted, and when I cried, He got angrier, said I was acting like a child, that a wife's duty was to submit. She was crying now, silent tears that soaked into his shirt. Every night after that, I'd lie there praying he'd leave me alone. Sometimes he did, sometimes he didn't. I learned to go somewhere else in my mind, to survive. Silas found his own eyes burning. I'm sorry. God, Clara, I'm so sorry. That's why I was so grateful when you said we'd take things slow. Why I was so relieved when you kept your promise. She wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand. But Silas, these past months, you've shown me that not all men are like Thomas. You've been patient, kind, gentle, and I find myself wanting things I never thought I'd want again. His heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could feel it. Clara, what are you saying? I'm saying that I trust you, that I care for you. More than care. She met his eyes. I'm saying that if you wanted to truly be my husband, in all ways, I wouldn't be afraid, not with you. The storm seemed to pause, holding its breath along with them. Silas cupped her face in his weathered hands, thumbs brushing away the last of her tears. Clara May Boone, he said hoarsely. I've wanted you since the moment you stepped off that stage, but I'd cut off my own hand before I'd hurt you or rush you. You're not a duty or a possession. You're my wife, my partner. And by God, you're the best thing that's ever happened to me. She smiled through her tears. Then perhaps you could kiss me just slowly, carefully, so I can learn what it's like when it's right. He leaned down, giving her every chance to pull away. Their lips met softly, barely a whisper of touch. Clara made a small sound, not of fear but of wonder, and pressed closer. The kiss deepened gradually, Silas letting her set the pace, his hands gentle on her face. When they finally parted, both were breathing unsteadily. Clara's eyes were wide with surprise. Oh, she said softly. Oh my, that was nothing like what you knew before. Nothing at all like that. She touched her lips in wonder. Could we do that again? This time she met him halfway, more confident, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. The storm raged around them, but inside their small circle of warmth, something beautiful was blooming. They talked through the night, sharing stories and kisses, learning each other in ways that had nothing to do with possession and everything to do with connection. Silas told her about his first love, a girl who died of fever before they could marry. Clara shared memories of her parents, of the dreams she'd had before life got in the way. What do you dream of now? He asked as dawn approached, the storm finally beginning to weaken. She was quiet for a long moment, her head on his shoulder, fingers tracing patterns on his chest. A home, she said finally. Children, maybe, if God wills it. A garden that grows year after year, sitting on the porch with you when we're old and gray, watching the sunset over the mountains. That's a good dream. What about you? What do you dream of? He pressed a kiss to her hair. Used to dream of forgetting. All the faces, all the blood. Now I dream of remembering this moment, your smile when you're kneading bread, the way you hum when you're hanging laundry, the sound of your voice reading Caesar, getting the pronunciation just right. Silas Boone, you're more poet than gunfighter. Don't let that get around. I've got a reputation to maintain. She laughed, and he realized it was the first time he'd heard her truly laugh. Not bitter or broken, but bright and free. Your secret's safe with me. The storm broke near noon, leaving behind a world transformed. Snow lay thick as a blanket, smoothing out the rough edges of the land until everything looked soft and clean. They ventured out together to check the animals, moving through drifts that came up to Clara's waist in places. The cattle had weathered the storm, huddled together in the draw. The horses nickered greetings from the barn, eager for food and attention. Everything had survived, including, Silas thought, watching Clara's face bright with cold and happiness, the two of them. That night, as they prepared for bed, Clara paused at the door to her room. They'd moved her things back. The crisis passed. But something had fundamentally changed between them.
Silas.
Yes? She looked at him, chin raised in that way he'd come to recognize as her gathering courage. I know we've only been married a few months. I know we're still learning each other, but I don't want to sleep alone tonight. Not after last night. Not after what we shared. His hands trembled, this man who'd faced down killers without blinking, whose hands were steady as stone in a gunfight. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. She held out her hand. Come to bed, husband. He took her hand, let her lead him to what had been her room alone. She'd prepared. He saw fresh sheets, candles providing soft light. The quilt her mother had made spread across the bed. She was trembling too, but her eyes were steady on his. We'll go slow, he promised. Any time you want to stop. I know. She reached up, began unbuttoning his shirt with careful fingers. I trust you. Remember. What followed was nothing like her wedding night with Thomas. Silas was endlessly patient, endlessly gentle, teaching her that touch could bring pleasure instead of pain. That vulnerability didn't mean violation. He showed her what it meant to be cherished, to be worshipped, to be loved. When she cried, it wasn't from hurt but from overwhelm, from the discovery that her body could feel such things, that intimacy could be beautiful instead of brutal. Silas held her through it, murmuring endearments, promising over and over that she was safe. She was loved. She was his miracle in this hard land. I didn't know, she whispered against his chest afterward, both of them tangled in quilts and moonlight. All those years, I thought something was wrong with me, that I was broken, or cold, but it wasn't me at all. Was it? No, sweetheart, it was never you. He stroked her hair, marveling at the trust she'd given him. You're perfect, brave and beautiful and absolutely perfect. She lifted her head to look at him. We're going to be all right, aren't we? Despite everything your past, mine, we're going to make this work. We already are, he said, and knew it was true. They'd weathered the storm, both outside and in. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. Outside, snow began to fall again, but gentle this time, fat, lazy flakes that drifted down like blessings. Inside, two people who'd thought themselves too damaged for love discovered that broken things, when fitted together just right, could make something whole and strong and beautiful. Clara fell asleep in her husband's arms, feeling safe for the first time in years. Silas stayed awake longer, watching her breathe, still hardly believing she was real. His hands, which had dealt so much death, now knew the shape of her smile, the weight of her trust, the miracle of her love. The storm had passed, but its gift remained, a night that had broken down the last walls between them, leaving in its wake not just husband and wife, but partners, lovers, and best friends. In the morning, they would face the world transformed, both outside and within, but for now, they simply held each other, two souls no longer alone in the vast Wyoming night. Spring came to Wyoming like a shy bride, hesitant at first, then blooming with sudden confidence. The snow retreated to the high peaks, leaving behind a land drunk on meltwater and possibility. Wildflowers pushed through the damp earth. Indian paintbrush, lupine, and Clara's favorite, the delicate pasque flowers that trembled in the slightest breeze. Clara stood in her garden, hands deep in the dark soil, planting the seeds she'd ordered from Denver. 3 months had passed since the blizzard, since that night when everything changed. Her wedding ring caught the morning light as she worked, and she smiled at the sight of it, still sometimes surprised to find herself here. Happy. You're up early, Silas said from behind her, his voice still rough with sleep. She turned to find him holding 2 cups of coffee, his hair endearingly mussed. The lettuce won't plant itself. Besides, someone needs to make sure you eat more than beef and beans. I ate plenty of vegetables before you came along, he protested, handing her a cup. Canned corn from 1867 doesn't count as vegetables. Silas Boone. He laughed, that rich sound she'd worked so hard to coax out of him more often. How do you know it was from 67? The label was faded to illegibility, and the can was rusted. I'm surprised you didn't get poisoned. Takes more than bad corn to kill me. He grew serious, watching her brush soil from her hands. You've got dirt on your nose. Where? She scrubbed at her face, likely making it worse. Here. He reached out, thumb gentle on her cheek, but instead of wiping away the smudge, he cupped her face and kissed her. Even now, months after their first kiss, it still made her knees weak. She leaned into him, coffee cup forgotten, marveling at how natural this had become. How right. You taste like coffee, she murmured against his lips. You taste like sunshine, he replied, then looked embarrassed at his own poetry. She was about to tease him when the sound of hoofbeats made them both turn. A rider was coming hard from the direction of town, dust clouding up behind him. Silas's hand went automatically to where his gun would be, then relaxed when he recognized the rider. That's J.B. Brown from the store. J.B. pulled up hard, his horse lathered and breathing heavy. Silas, thank God you're here. We got trouble in town. What kind of trouble? Samuel Morrison, he's in town with a bunch of hard cases, saying he's got legal claim to your missus. JB's eyes flicked to Clara apologetically. Begging your pardon, ma'am, but he's waving around some paper. Says she was promised to him before she married you. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. Samuel Morrison, Thomas's cousin, the one who'd made her life hell after Thomas died, trying to claim her like property passed down in a will. She'd thought she'd left him behind in Missouri. That's impossible, she said, voice steadier than her hands. I was a widow when I married Silas. Free to marry whoever I chose. He's saying different. J.B. continued. Says he's got a contract signed by your late husband, promising you to him if anything happened. Says your marriage to Silas ain't legal. Silas had gone very still, the kind of stillness that Clara had learned meant danger. Where is he now? Silver Dollar Saloon, holding court. Sheriff Grant's trying to keep things calm, but Morrison's got 5 men with him, and they're all armed. Silas, Clara began, but he was already moving, checking his Colt, sliding extra cartridges into his belt. I'm going to town, he said flatly. We're going to town, she corrected. This is my fight too. Clara, no, these men think they can trade me like cattle. Her chin came up in that way he knew meant argument was useless. I ran from Samuel Morrison once. I won't run again. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Get your coat, J.B., water your horse. We'll take the wagon. The ride to town was tense. Silas's rifle across his knees, his eyes scanning the horizon. Clara sat beside him, back straight, trying to calm the flutter of panic in her chest. She'd thought she was free of her past, but it seemed the past had other ideas. Tell me about Morrison, Silas said quietly. He's Thomas's cousin, a gambler, mostly, with pretensions of being a businessman. After Thomas died, he showed up saying Thomas owed him money, that I had to pay the debt one way or another. She shuddered. I sold everything I could, gave him nearly all of it, but it wasn't enough. He said there were other ways a pretty widow could pay. Silas's hands tightened on the reins. Did he? No, that's when I wrote to Jeremiah, begging for help. He arranged for me to come here. To you, she touched his arm. I should have told you. I'm sorry. Nothing to be sorry for. We've all got things we're running from. He covered her hand with his. Difference is, now you're not running alone. Willow Creek was buzzing like a disturbed hive when they arrived. People clustered in small groups, talking in low voices. and Clara could feel their eyes following the wagon down Main Street. Sheriff Grant met them outside the saloon.
Silas, Mrs. Boone, I was hoping you'd come in peaceful-like.
I'm always peaceful until someone makes me otherwise. Silas replied, This Morrison causing real trouble or just blowing smoke? He's got some sort of legal document. Claims it's binding. I told him he'd need to take it before Judge Pierce, but he says he wants to discuss it with Mrs. Boone first. Grant's expression made clear what he thought of that discussion. I'll talk to him, Clara said. Like hell, Silas growled.
Silas.
She turned to face him fully.
This is my past, my problem. Let me try to handle it with words before you handle it with bullets.
They locked eyes, a silent battle of wills.
Finally.
He nodded tightly. I'll be right beside you. I know. The silver dollar was thick with smoke and tension. Samuel Morrison sat at a back table like a king holding court, his men arranged around him. He hadn't changed much, still had the same thin face, the same cold eyes that seemed to strip dignity away with a glance. He was dealing cards with quick, practiced movements, a show of nonchalance that didn't match the predatory gleam in his eyes when he saw her.
Clara, my dear, you're looking well.
He stood, a mockery of gentlemanly behavior.
Ranch life seems to agree with you. Mr. Morrison.
She didn't move from Silas's side.
I heard you were in town making false claims.
False. He produced a paper from his coat with a flourish. I have here a legally binding document, signed by your late husband, promising you to me in marriage should anything befall him. A sort of insurance policy on his investment.
That's not legal, Clara said flatly. Women aren't property to be traded in wills.
Perhaps not in your fancy eastern cities, Morrison smiled thinly, but here in the territories, law is a bit more flexible, and this document predates your supposed marriage to Mr. Boone here. Let me see it, Sheriff Grant said. Morrison handed it over with obvious reluctance. The sheriff studied it, frowning. It appears to be legal, or at least arguable. You'd need Judge Pierce to rule on it. Then let's go see the judge, Silas said, speaking for the first time. In due time, Morrison replied. First, I thought Clara and I should discuss terms. Perhaps we can come to an arrangement that suits everyone. What kind of arrangement? Clara asked, though she thought she knew. Well, there's the matter of the debt Thomas left behind. Considerable debt. If you were to honor the original agreement, become my wife as intended, that debt would be forgiven. If not, he shrugged, I'd have to pursue collection through other means. Your current husband seems to have a profitable ranch. I'm sure he could cover it. How much? Silas asked quietly. Morrison named a figure that made Clara gasp. It was more than the ranch was worth, more than they could raise if they sold everything. That's robbery, Sheriff Grant said. That's business, Morrison corrected. Interest accumulates. Sheriff, it's been 3 years.
You're lying, Clara said. Thomas didn't owe you anything like that.
Can you prove it? Morrison's smile was sharp as a blade. I have documentation. Do you? Clara felt trapped, the walls of the saloon pressing in. This was why she'd run, why she'd been so desperate to escape. Men like Morrison always had papers, always had legal-sounding words to make their theft legitimate. I have a counteroffer, Silas said suddenly. Morrison raised an eyebrow.
Oh.
Single combat. You and me. Winner takes all you win. We pay the debt. I win. You leave and never come back.
Silas, no,
Clara breathed. Morrison laughed. Gunfight, how delightfully primitive. But I'm a businessman, Mr. Boone, not a gunslinger. Then choose your weapon. Fists, knives, cards, I don't care. unless you're too yellow to face me yourself instead of hiding behind paper and hired guns." The saloon went dead silent. Morrison's face flushed at the insult, and Clara saw his pride war with his caution. "Cards," he said finally. 5-card draw, best of 3 hands. If I win, I get the money and Clara honors her late husband's promise. If you win, I leave and the debt dies with me." "No," Clara said firmly. "I won't be wagered like a pot of gold." "Then the debt stands," Morrison said, "and I'll use every legal means to collect." Silas looked at Clara. In his eyes, she saw the question, "Trust me." She thought of all the nights they'd spent by the fire, all the gentle mornings, all the ways he'd shown her that men could be good. She thought of his steady hands, his patient heart, his quiet strength. "All right," she said softly. "But I want witnesses. Half the town, at least, and Sheriff Grant holds the paper." Morrison's smile widened. "Agreed. Shall we say 1 hour? Give people time to gather." The next hour passed in a blur. Word spread through town like wildfire, and by the time they returned to the saloon, it was packed. Mrs. Beecher was there, and Doc Edison, and even Martha Roosevelt, drawn by the drama despite her hatred of Silas. Clara stood behind Silas's chair as the 2 men faced each other across the table. Her hand rested on his shoulder, feeling the tension in his muscles. "You ever played cards for stakes before, Boone?" Morrison asked, shuffling with showy expertise. "Once or twice." "Well, I hope you're better at it than Thomas was. He lost quite a bit to me before his unfortunate end." Clara's hand tightened on Silas's shoulder. He reached up, covered her hand with his. A silent promise. The first hand went to Morrison. He played brilliantly, aggressively, reading Silas's stoic expression for tells that weren't there. The crowd murmured, and Clara heard someone whisper about Morrison's reputation as a card sharp. The second hand started the same way, Morrison pressing advantages, building the pot. Then Silas did something unexpected. He smiled, just a little, just enough to make Morrison hesitate. "You know," Silas said conversationally, dealing cards with hands that had seen 1,000 games in army camps and trail towns. "I learned poker from an old Apache scout named Geronimo, not the famous one. Just shared the name. He told me the secret to cards wasn't reading faces." "No," Morrison's eyes narrowed. "No, it was understanding what a man values most. See, a man who values money plays different than a man who values pride, and a man who values control." He laid down his cards full house. Queens over 8s. He plays predictable. Morrison stared at the cards, then pushed back from the table. "You cheated." "And you prove it," Silas said mildly. "Unless you're saying you can't beat an honest rancher at cards." Morrison's face was near purple as he dealt the final hand. This time, he played desperately, trying trick shuffles and fancy deals that Sheriff Grant watched with narrowed eyes. But desperation made him sloppy, and when the final cards were shown, Silas had won with 3 sevens, the luck of the Lord. Clara's father would have called it. "I believe we're done here," Sheriff Grant said, taking the paper from his pocket. "Mr. Morrison, you'll be leaving town now." "This isn't over," Morrison snarled, standing so fast his chair toppled. "You think you've won? I've got friends, influence." "And I've got this," Silas said quietly, also standing. For the first time in months, Clara saw the gunfighter he'd been cold, dangerous, deadly. "You come near my wife again. You so much as send a letter, and we'll settle this permanent. That's not a threat. Morrison, that's a promise." Morrison looked around the room, saw no sympathy in any face, and made the smart choice. "Boys, we're leaving." They filed out, Morrison pausing at the door for one last venomous look. Then they were gone, the sound of their horses fading into the evening. The saloon erupted in conversation, but Clara only had eyes for her husband. He turned to her, the gunfighter mask dropping away, and she saw his hands were trembling.
"You all right?" he asked softly. "Am I all right, Silas Boone? You just gambled everything we have on a card game?"
"No," he corrected, pulling her close despite the crowd. "I bet everything on us, on knowing that men like Morrison always push too hard, always overplay their hand.
Just like at the ranch that night you told me about, Thomas. I knew then you were done running. Figured it was time Morrison learned that, too."
She should have been angry at the risk he'd taken. Instead, she found herself pulling his head down for a kiss that drew whoops and applause from the crowd. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she whispered,
"Take me home, Silas."
They left town as heroes, people calling congratulations, even Martha Roosevelt giving a grudging nod of respect. J.B. Brown promised to send word if Morrison was seen in the territory again, and Sheriff Grant said he'd look into the legitimacy of Morrison's other claims, maybe save some other poor soul from his schemes. The ride home was quiet, both of them processing what had happened. As they crested the hill that brought their ranch into view, Clara finally spoke.
"You knew how to play cards all along."
"Army teaches a man many things. You could have told me. Would you have let me play if you'd known the truth that I spent 2 years as a cavalry scout, and the only entertainment we had was poker?" He glanced at her. "That I once won a horse, a saddle, and a man's boots in a single hand." His boots. He was very confident, also very wrong.
"Despite everything," she laughed, "what else don't I know about you?"
"Well," he said, pulling up in front of their house, their home, "I can juggle. Learned from a traveling circus performer in Dodge City." "You cannot." "Can too, also. I write poetry. Terrible poetry, but still."
"Silas Boone, gunfighter poet."
She shook her head in wonder.
"What have I gotten myself into?"
"A life," he said simply. "A good one, I hope." That night, as they lay tangled together in their bed, Clara traced the scars on his chest by moonlight, each one a story, a moment when death had come calling and been turned away.
"I was scared today,"
she admitted.
"When Morrison showed up, I thought I'd have to run again, or worse, that you'd get hurt defending me."
"I'll always defend you," he said. "But Clara, you defended yourself. You stood up to him, faced him down. You're the strongest woman I know."
"I don't feel strong."
"Strength isn't about feeling it, it's about standing up anyway." He kissed her forehead. "You've taught me that." She was quiet for a long moment. Then,
"Do you really write poetry?"
he groaned. "I'm never living that down, am I?" "Never. In fact, I think you should write me one, about today. There once was a gambler named Morrison who thought he could steal like a Harrison." She swatted him, laughing.
"That's a limerick, not poetry."
"Woman's never satisfied," he grumbled, but he was smiling. They talked and loved until dawn painted the mountains pink and gold. And in the morning, when Clara went to tend her garden, she found he'd left a paper on her pillow. His handwriting was rough, the words simple, but they made her cry in the best way. Asterisk wild rose found in winter's snow, teaching stone hearts how to grow, green eyes bright with sage-born fire. You are all I could desire. Home is not just wood and land. Home is holding Clara's hand. She pressed the poem to her heart and looked out at the wide Wyoming sky. Samuel Morrison was gone, the past finally buried. The future stretched ahead like an unplanted field, full of possibility. And in her garden, the first shoots of spring pushed through the earth, reaching toward the sun. Summer had baked the Wyoming earth to the consistency of stone, and the air shimmered with heat mirages that made the distant mountains dance. Clara stood at the window, watching the road that led to town, her hand unconsciously resting on her stomach. 3 weeks had passed since she'd sent word to Doc Edison, asking him to visit when he could. She hadn't told Silas yet, wanted to be certain first. "You're going to wear a hole in that floor," Silas said from behind her, his arms sliding around her waist. She leaned back against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence.
Just watching for Doc Edison. He said he might come by today.
You feeling poorly? Concern colored his voice immediately. You have been looking a bit peaked lately.
I'm fine,
she assured him, turning in his arms.
Just wanted to ask him about some women's matters.
He colored slightly, as he always did when the mysteries of womanhood were mentioned. Ah. Well, I'll make myself scarce when he arrives then. She was about to tell him the words were right there on her tongue when a dust cloud on the horizon caught her attention. But it wasn't Doc Edison's neat buggy. It was riders, moving fast, too many to count in the heat haze. Silas saw them too. His whole body tensed, and he moved her gently aside to get a better look. "Get my rifle," he said quietly, "and bar the door behind me."
Silas? Now, Clara.
She'd learned to recognize when argument was useless. She fetched his Winchester and his gun belt, watching as he checked loads with the efficiency of long practice. Through the window, the riders were clearer now, 6 men, armed, led by a figure she recognized with a sick lurch of her stomach.
It's Morrison,
she breathed.
He came back.
With friends, by the look of it. Silas's face had gone cold. Settling into the mask she'd only seen a few times, the face of the man who'd survived wars and hunted killers. "Clara, I need you to listen very carefully. There's a loaded shotgun in the bedroom closet and a box of shells. You take it and go to the root cellar. Bar the door from inside and don't come out until I call for you. I'm not leaving you to face 6 men alone." "Yes, you are." He gripped her shoulders, eyes boring into hers. "Because if this goes bad, you need to survive. Promise me, Clara, promise me you'll hide." Before she could answer, the riders pulled up in the yard, dust swirling around them like smoke. Morrison sat his horse easily, a new confidence in his bearing that sent chills down Clara's spine. "Boone," Morrison's voice carried clearly, "come on out. We need to talk." Silas kissed Clara hard and quick. "Root cellar, now!" He stepped out onto the porch before she could protest, rifle held casual but ready. Clara moved to the window, torn between obedience and the need to stand beside her husband. "Morrison," Silas said calmly. "Thought I made myself clear about you coming around here." "You did," Morrison smiled, "and it was an ugly thing. But see, things have changed. I've been to the territorial capital. Filed some papers, made some friends." He pulled out a document with an official-looking seal. "This here's a lien on your property. Boone, seems you owe back taxes. Quite a lot of them." "That's impossible. I've paid every tax required." "Have you? Funny thing about records, sometimes they get lost. Sometimes they get changed. And when a man can't prove he's paid..." Morrison shrugged. "Well, the territory needs its revenue. You've got 30 days to come up with $5,000, or this ranch goes to auction." Clara gasped. $5,000 might as well have been $5 million. "And let me guess," Silas said, still deadly calm. "You'll be there to bid. Public auction, anyone can bid." Morrison's eyes flicked to the house. "Where's that pretty wife of yours? We should discuss this as a family." "She's not your concern." "Oh, but she is. See, there's another option. That paper I had before. Promising Clara to me, I had some lawyer friends look at it. They say it's got merit, enough to tie things up in court for years. Unless..." He let it hang. "Unless what?" "Unless we come to an arrangement. Clara honors her late husband's promise, comes with me peaceful-like, and this tax problem just disappears, like magic." Clara's hands clenched on the windowsill. She'd heard enough. Grabbing the shotgun from the closet, she marched out onto the porch before Silas could stop her. "The answer is no," she said clearly. The shotgun held steady in her hands. "I'm not property to be bartered. Mr. Morrison, not anymore." Morrison's eyes lit with something ugly.
Ah, there she is. Hello, Clara. You're looking well, blooming. Even ranch life must agree with you.
State your business and get off our land.
Such fire, Thomas never mentioned that, though I suppose he had ways of keeping you docile.
The shotgun swung toward him.
Don't you dare speak his name. Clara, Silas warned quietly.
Listen to your husband. My dear, violence would be unfortunate, especially in your condition.
Clara froze. How could he know she'd only suspected herself for a few weeks?
Morrison laughed at her expression.
Oh, yes, I know all about your visit to Doc Edison's office last month, asking about morning sickness, about changes in a woman's body. Small towns do talk. Congratulations. By the way, I'm sure Silas is thrilled about becoming a father.
Silas went very still.
Clara, she couldn't look at him. Not now. Not like this. I wanted to be sure before I told you.
How touching, Morrison continued.
Though it does complicate things.
See, if something were to happen to Silas, and accidents do happen out here, especially to men with violent pasts, you'd be a widow again. With a child to raise alone, that's hard living for a woman. Unless, of course, she had a protector, a husband with means.
If you're threatening my family, Silas began.
But Morrison cut him off.
Threatening me?
I'm a businessman.
Boone, not a thug.
I'm simply laying out facts. You can't pay the tax lien. Fighting it in court will take years and every penny you have. But if Clara comes with me, everyone wins. You keep your ranch. She gets a comfortable life. The child grows up with advantages.
I'd rather die,
Clara said flatly. That can be arranged too, one of Morrison's men muttered, earning a sharp look from his boss.
Now, no need for such talk.
Morrison adjusted his coat, and Clara caught a glimpse of papers in his inner pocket. Tell you what, I'm a sporting man. Let's settle this like gentlemen. A contest. You win. I tear up the lien and disappear forever. I win. Clara comes with me.
We already played cards,
Silas reminded him. I was thinking something more. Physical. You've got quite a reputation as a fighter. Boone, how about we tested you against my best man here? He gestured to the largest of his companions. A mountain of a man with scarred knuckles and a nose that had been broken multiple times. Benjamin Harrison, bare-knuckle champion from Chicago.
Silas, no, Clara said. It's a trap.
Maybe, but it's also a chance to end this. Silas studied Harrison, who grinned and cracked his knuckles. What rules? No rules. Fight until one man can't get up. Winner takes all.
And if I say no?
Morrison shrugged. Then we do this the legal way. Long, expensive, painful. Your choice.
Clara saw Silas weighing options, saw the moment he made his decision. Clear a space, he said. Let's get this done.
The men dismounted, forming a rough circle in the yard. Silas handed Clara his rifle and started unbuttoning his shirt.
This is insane, she hissed. He's twice your size.
Size isn't everything. He touched her face gently. Trust me. And whatever happens, remember you're the strongest woman I know.
Silas, is it true about the baby?
She nodded, tears threatening.
I'm sorry you had to find out this way.
His face transformed with wonder, then hardened with determination. Then I've got even more reason to win. He kissed her forehead. Watch for tricks. Morrison didn't come here to fight fair. Benjamin Harrison was already in the makeshift ring, rolling his shoulders, loosening up. He moved well for a big man, balanced and confident. This wasn't some saloon brawler, this was a professional. They circled each other, taking measure. Harrison struck first, a lightning jab that Silas barely slipped. The big man followed with a combination that would have dropped most men, but Silas had learned to fight in places where losing meant dying. He weathered the storm, landed a few shots of his own, testing for weaknesses. He's playing with you. Boone, Morrison called out. Benjamin, stop dancing and finish this. Harrison obliged, rushing in with a haymaker that would have taken Silas's head off if it had connected. But Silas wasn't there. He'd pivoted, using Harrison's momentum against him, landing a vicious shot to the kidneys as the big man passed. Harrison grunted, spun, caught Silas with a backhand that sent him sprawling. Clara bit her knuckle to keep from crying out as Silas rolled away from a stomp that would have crushed his ribs. They fought like animals. No science or art to it now, just brutal survival. Blood flowed from split lips and cut eyes. Silas's left eye was swelling shut, and Harrison was favoring his right side where those kidney shots had landed. Then Clara saw at one of Morrison's men moving slightly, hand drifting toward his gun. He was positioning himself behind Silas, waiting for an opportunity. Silas, behind you. Her warning came just as Harrison charged again. Silas, caught between threats, made a desperate choice. Instead of dodging, he met Harrison's charge head-on, accepting a devastating punch to drive his own fist into the big man's throat. Harrison went down gasping, clutching his neck. The man behind Silas had his gun half drawn when Clara's shotgun boomed, the blast taking his hat off and sending him diving for cover. "Nobody moves," she shouted, already breaking the gun open to reload. "This is between them." Morrison's face was ugly with rage. "You little—" "Choose your words carefully," Silas said, getting slowly to his feet. Blood ran down his face, and he swayed slightly, but he was standing. Harrison was still on the ground, making horrible wheezing sounds. "I believe I won." "This isn't over," Morrison snarled. "Yes, it is." Silas walked unsteadily to Morrison's horse. "The lien. Hand it over." "That's an official document. You can't just—" Silas's hand moved, almost too fast to follow. Morrison's fancy coat was suddenly pinned to his saddle by a knife, the blade having passed close enough to skin to draw a thin line of blood. "The lien," Silas repeated, with shaking hands. Morrison pulled out the papers. Silas took them, examined the seal, then tore them in half, then quarters, then eighths, letting the pieces flutter away in the hot wind. "We're done here," he said. "Get Harrison on a horse and get out. Don't come back." "You think you've won?" Morrison's voice was high, desperate. "I've got influence, connections. I'll destroy you both." "No," a new voice said. "You won't." Everyone turned to see Doc Edison's buggy pulling into the yard. But he wasn't alone. Sheriff Grant was with him, along with Judge Pierce and 2 federal marshals. "Samuel Morrison," one of the marshals said, "you're under arrest for fraud, forgery, and attempted extortion." Morrison went white. "What, you can't?" "Oh, but we can," Judge Pierce said dryly. "Seems your lawyer friends in the Capitol were a bit too chatty about your schemes. That tax lien forged, the seal stolen, and that's just the start of your problems." As the marshals took Morrison into custody, Sheriff Grant approached Silas and Clara. "Sorry we couldn't get here sooner. Doc Edison came to fetch us as soon as he got Clara's message. But we wanted to make sure we had enough evidence to make it stick." "My message," Clara said blankly. "I only asked him to come for a medical consultation." Doc Edison chuckled, "Which I found odd, since I'd just seen you last month and pronounced you healthy as a horse. Figured something was up, so I did some investigating. Good thing, too." As Morrison and his men were led away, still protesting, Doc Edison turned his attention to Silas. "Now then, let me look at those cuts. Mrs. Boone. Might want to put that shotgun down before you shoot someone accidentally." Clara realized she was still holding the gun, knuckles white on the stock. She set it aside carefully and flew to Silas's side as he sank onto the porch steps. "Don't you ever scare me like that again," she said fiercely, using her apron to dab at the blood on his face. "Yes, ma'am," he said meekly, then winced as Doc Edison probed his ribs. "Nothing broken, though you'll be sore for a week." The doctor pronounced, "Now, While I'm here, Mrs. Boone, about that consultation you wanted. Clara blushed. I think we've had enough excitement for one day. Nonsense, Silas. Your wife has something to tell you, or would have, if Morrison hadn't spoiled it. Doc Edison smiled, though I suspect you figured it out by now. Silas caught Clara's hands in his battered ones. Is it true? She nodded, tears finally spilling over. I wanted to tell you properly. I wanted it to be perfect. It is perfect. He pulled her close, mindful of his injuries. We're having a baby. Late winter, near as I can figure. Doc Edison said, "Congratulations to you both." Sheriff Grant cleared his throat. We'll be heading back to town. Give you folks some privacy. Morrison won't be troubling you again. Federal prison tends to cure men of such notions. After they'd gone, Silas and Clara sat on their porch, watching the sun sink toward the mountains. His face was a mess of bruises and cuts, but his smile was radiant. A baby, he kept saying. We're having a baby. Are you happy? Clara asked anxiously. I know we haven't been married long. And with all the trouble. Clara May Boone, he interrupted. I've been shot, stabbed, beaten, and generally knocked around for most of my adult life. Today, I got thrashed by a professional fighter while defending my pregnant wife from a criminal who wanted to steal her. He grinned, then winced as it pulled at a split lip. I've never been happier. She laughed through her tears. You're insane. Probably, but I'm your insane. He grew serious. Clara, what you did today standing up to Morrison, watching my back in the fight. I couldn't let them hurt you, either of you. Her hand went to her stomach. You were magnificent, terrifying, but magnificent. He kissed her temple. Our child is going to have one hell of a mother. And father, she added, though I'd prefer if you could avoid fistfights with giants in the future. I'll do my best. He was quiet for a moment. A baby. Here. In this place we've built together. Are you thinking of your mother? Clara asked softly. Yes, she would have been so happy. She always said this land needed children's laughter to make it complete. He smiled sadly. I wish she could have met you. Could have known about the baby. She knows, Clara said firmly. I believe that. And Silas, we're going to tell this child all about their grandmother, about how she came west as a young bride and carved out a life through sheer determination, just like their mother. Just like their mother, he agreed. Though hopefully with less excitement, I don't think my heart can take another day like today. As if in agreement, the baby chose that moment to make its presence known in a wave of nausea that sent Clara rushing for the wash basin. Silas held her hair back, rubbing gentle circles on her back. Sorry, she gasped when it passed. Doc Edison says it should ease up soon. Don't apologize. You're growing our child. You can be sick on my boots if you need to. Romantic as always, Mr. Boone. They went inside as darkness fell, moving slowly to accommodate various aches and pains. Clara made a simple supper, both of them too exhausted for anything elaborate. As they prepared for bed, Silas stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm. Clara, I know today didn't go how either of us planned. But I want you to know I love you. I loved you before I knew about the baby. And I'll love you until the day I die. You and this child are everything to me. She pulled his head down for a careful kiss, mindful of his split lip. I love you too, Silas, bruises and all. That night, as they lay carefully entwined, Clara felt the last of her old fears finally fade away. Morrison was gone for good. The threats to their happiness had been faced and defeated, and beneath her heart, new life was growing, a blend of her strength and Silas's courage, a child who would know only love and safety. What should we name it? Silas asked drowsily. The baby. Well, if it's a boy, I thought maybe Henry, after your father. And if it's a girl, Clara smiled in the darkness. Faith, for the faith that brought us together, and the faith that kept us strong. Faith Boone, he murmured. I like it. They fell asleep to the sound of coyotes singing in the distance, their wild music no longer lonely but full of promise. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, a ranch to run, a child to prepare for, a life to build. But tonight, in their small house on the vast Wyoming plain, all was well. The past had been faced, the future stretched ahead, bright with possibility. And in Clara's womb, the next chapter of their story was already beginning. The autumn moon hung low and orange over the Wyoming plains, casting long shadows across the ranch yard. Clara stood at the kitchen window, one hand resting on her swollen belly, watching the horizon with growing unease. Silas had ridden out at dawn to check on the herd in the far pasture, promising to be back by supper. That was 6 hours ago. He's fine, she told herself for the 100th time. Just lost track of time. But the baby seemed to sense her anxiety, turning restlessly within her. At 7 months pregnant, every movement was felt keenly, and tonight the child was as agitated as its mother. The sound of a horse made her heart leap, but it wasn't Silas who rode into view. It was Jack Henley, one of their nearest neighbors, and his face told her everything she feared before he even dismounted. Mrs. Boone, he said, hat in hand, breathless from hard riding. There's been trouble. Your husband sent me to warn you. What kind of trouble? But even as she asked, she knew. Morrison might be in federal prison, but he'd had friends, associates who'd lost money when his schemes fell apart. Group of men, maybe 8 or 10. They hit the Carlson place this morning, looking for Silas. When they didn't find him, they burned the barn. Jack's weathered face was grim. Silas saw the smoke, went to help. He sent me here while he and Bill Carlson are holding them off. Clara's mind raced. How long ago? Maybe an hour. Mrs. Boone. Silas said you're to bar the doors and wait. Said on no account were you to come after him. Clara was already moving, checking the load on the rifle above the fireplace. Mr. Henley, my husband is outnumbered 5 to 1, and you want me to sit here and wait. Ma'am, in your condition. My condition is that I'm pregnant, not helpless. She strapped on Silas's spare gun belt, the weight of it familiar now from his teaching. Can you ride back with me? Jack shifted uncomfortably. Silas will skin me alive if I let you. And I'll shoot you myself if you try to stop me. She softened her tone. Jack, please, I can't lose him. Not now. The older man studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Can you ride? Better than I can wait. She saddled her mare quickly, grateful for the divided skirt she'd taken to wearing since her pregnancy began to show. Jack helped her mount, his disapproval evident but overruled by her determination. They rode hard but carefully, Clara protecting her unborn child as best she could while pushing for speed. The Carlson Ranch was 5 miles north, and smoke was visible long before they reached it. Not just from the barn, the house was burning too. Dear God, Clara breathed. They found cover in a stand of cottonwoods overlooking the ranch. Below, she could see the attackers' positions, men scattered behind whatever cover they could find, firing steadily at the main house. Return fire came from 2 windows, but it was sporadic. They were running low on ammunition. There, Jack pointed. That's Silas in the upper window. Clara's heart clenched at the sight of him. Even from this distance, she could see blood on his shirt. He's hurt. Question is, how do we help him? Jack scanned the scene. We're only 2 against 8, and you're... I have an idea. Clara was studying the attackers' positions. They're focused on the house. If you could circle around, come at them from the east. While you do what exactly? She checked her rifle. Create a distraction. Before Jack could protest, a new player entered the scene. A lone rider approached from the south, moving without hurry despite the gunfight ahead. As he drew closer, Clara recognized the badge glinting on his vest. "That's Sheriff Grant," Jack said, surprised. "What's he doing out here alone?" They watched as Grant rode straight toward the burning ranch, apparently oblivious to danger. One of the attackers stood up, shouting a warning. Grant's response was too quick to follow his gun-cleared leather and fired in one motion. The man spun and fell.
Say, Federal Marshal Ulysses S. Grant.
The sheriff's voice boomed across the yard.
You boys are under arrest for arson, attempted murder, and being dumb enough to start trouble in my jurisdiction.
The attackers hesitated, caught off guard. In that moment of confusion, Clara acted. She spurred her mare forward, riding hard down the slope while firing from horseback, not trying to hit anyone, just adding to the chaos.
"What in the hell?"
someone shouted. Jack Henley joined in from the opposite direction, his Winchester barking steadily, caught in a sudden crossfire, with a federal marshal in play and their numbers no longer overwhelming. The attacker's nerve broke.
"Pull back,"
one screamed.
"It's a trap."
They scattered like quail, racing for their horses. Grant picked off one more. Jack winged another, and then they were fleeing across the prairie, leaving their wounded behind. Clara didn't watch them go. She was already off her horse, running toward the house despite her ungainly gait. Silas. He met her at the door, alive but bloodied, his left arm hanging useless.
"Clara, what the hell are you doing here?"
"Saving you, apparently." She caught him as he swayed. "How bad?"
"Bullet in the shoulder.
"I'll live." His good hand cupped her face.
You magnificent, infuriating woman. I told Jack to keep you safe.
You married me for better or worse. Silas Boone, that includes gunfights. Bill Carlson emerged from the house, supporting his wife. Both were smoke-blackened but largely unhurt. "Silas saved us," Bill said. "Held them off near an hour. But Clara, weren't for you and Jack showing up when you did." "Don't forget the sheriff," Grant said, walking up with his gun still drawn. "Though I'll admit, Mrs. Boone, your timing was perfect. Nothing quite like a pregnant woman charging into battle to confuse the enemy." "How did you know to come?" Silas asked, leaning heavily on Clara. "Got word this morning that some of Morrison's old associates had been spotted in the territory. Figured they might try something stupid." Grant looked at the burning buildings and sighed. Didn't figure on them being this stupid. The next hour passed in a blur. Doc Edison arrived with remarkable speed, summoned by some invisible frontier network of communication. He worked on Silas in the Carlsons' yard while Clara held her husband's good hand, trying not to let him see her fear. Clean through. Edison pronounced, "You're lucky. Silas inch lower and it would have hit the lung." "Don't feel lucky." Silas grunted as the doctor cleaned the wound. "You're alive. Your wife and child are safe. And the men who attacked you are either dead or running for the territory border." Edison began wrapping the bandage. I'd call that lucky. As the doctor worked, neighbors began arriving. Word had spread, and the frontier community responded as it always did to crisis with help. Men brought tools and lumber to help the Carlsons rebuild. Women brought food and comfort. By sunset, the makings of a new barn were already taking shape. Clara found herself the center of attention, much to her embarrassment. Rode in shooting like Annie Oakley herself. Jack Henley was telling anyone who'd listen. 7 months gone with child and steady as a rock. "You shouldn't have risked yourself," Mrs. Beecher said, but her tone was more admiring than scolding. "Though Lord knows, these men need us to save them from their own foolishness sometimes." Silas, arm in a sling but mobile, found Clara sitting on a wagon tailgate, finally able to rest. The baby had settled too, no longer turning somersaults. "You know," he said, sitting carefully beside her, "when I sent Jack to warn you, I specifically said to stay put." You also said, for better or worse, when we married. Did you mean it?
Course I did.
Then stop trying to protect me from our life. Silas, we're partners. Where you go, I go. What threatens you, threatens me. He was quiet for a moment, watching their neighbors work together in the fading light. I could have lost you today, both of you. But you didn't, because we're stronger together than apart. She took his good hand, placed it on her belly where the baby was kicking lazily. This child is going to grow up knowing that sometimes you have to fight for what you love. That courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about acting despite the fear. Like its mother, Silas said softly. And its father. You held off 8 men alone to save the Carlsons. I wasn't alone. I knew you were safe, and that gave me strength. He kissed her temple. Though next time, maybe we could avoid the gunfights altogether. I'll do my best, but I make no promises. Trouble seems to find us. Sheriff Grant approached, looking tired but satisfied. We caught 3 of them trying to cross into Nebraska. The others won't get far. Every lawman in 3 territories is looking for them now. This connected to Morrison? Silas asked. His cousin, Andrew Johnson, apparently thought he could take over Samuel's operations, starting with revenge on you. Grant shook his head. Some people never learn. Will there be others? Clara asked quietly. Grant considered. Maybe you've made enemies of some bad people, but you've also shown you won't be pushed around. Word of today will spread. How a pregnant woman and a wounded man stood off 8 attackers and won. That kind of reputation provides its own protection. As if to emphasize his point, Bill Carlson approached with several other ranchers. Silas, we've been talking. What happened today could happen to any of us. We want to form a mutual protection association. You know, riders checking on each other, signal fires if there's trouble, that sort of thing. Strength in numbers. Another rancher added, What do you say? Silas looked at Clara, who nodded encouragingly. We say yes, he answered. And thank you. The ride home was slow and careful. Silas fighting to stay in the saddle despite his wound. Clara stayed close, ready to catch him if needed. The moon was high now, painting the prairie in silver and shadow. You know what I kept thinking during the fight? Silas said suddenly. What? About our child, about the world we're bringing it into. It's hard and dangerous and sometimes cruel. Are you having second thoughts? No, because I also thought about you, about the courage you showed today, about these neighbors who came running to help without being asked. This is a hard land, yes, but it makes strong people, good people. He smiled at her in the moonlight. Our child will be born into a community that protects its own, with parents who'll face down any threat together. That's not a bad start in life. They reached home to find Jack Henley had stayed behind to guard the ranch. He'd lit lanterns and started a fire, the house glowing warmly in the darkness. All quiet, he reported. Though you might want to teach your chickens some manners. One of them tried to peck my eyes out. That's Cleopatra, Clara said. She's protective of her territory. Wonder where she learned that, Jack said dryly, earning a laugh from Silas that turned into a wince of pain. Inside, Clara helped Silas to bed, then set about making tea and checking his bandages. The familiar domestic tasks helped calm her nerves after the day's violence. Clara, Silas said as she fussed with his pillows, I need you to promise me something. What? If something happens to me, nothing's going to happen to you. Listen, please. His good hand caught hers. If something happens, you take our child and you go somewhere safe. Back east, maybe, or to California, somewhere the violence can't follow. She sat on the edge of the bed, choosing her words carefully. Silas Boone, if something happens to you, I'll mourn you every day of my life, but I won't run. This is our home. This is where our child belongs. We've watered this land with our sweat and our blood. We've earned our place here. You're the stubbornest woman I've ever met. And you love me for it.
God help me, I do.
He pulled her down for a kiss.
All right, no running. We stand and fight.
Together, she emphasized. Always together. Later, as Silas slept with the help of Doc Edison's laudanum, Clara sat by the window keeping watch, her rifle rested nearby, loaded and ready. The baby moved within her, and she rubbed her belly soothingly. "It's all right, little one," she whispered.
Your papa's going to be fine. We're all going to be fine.
In the distance, she could see signal fires on neighboring ranches, the new protection association already taking shape. They were no longer alone out here. They had community, friendship, mutual support. The violence would come again. She knew. Men like Morrison and his cousin didn't give up easily. But when it came, they'd be ready. Not just her and Silas, but all of them, standing together against whatever threatened their hard-won peace. Clara's hand moved to her gun belt, then to her belly, feeling the life within. Tomorrow she'd help raise a barn. Next month she'd give birth. Next year she'd teach her child to ride across these prairies she'd come to love. This was her life now, dangerous, difficult, but absolutely hers, and she wouldn't trade it for all the safety in the world. The first snow of winter fell like a blessing on the day Faith Elizabeth Boone entered the world. Clara had been pacing the kitchen since dawn, one hand pressed to her aching back, when the first real contraction hit. Silas, who'd been hovering anxiously for days, nearly dropped his coffee mug.
Is it?
"It's time," Clara gasped, gripping the table edge.
Get Doc Edison and Mrs. Beecher. Hurry.
He was out the door before she finished speaking, leaving her alone with the enormous reality of what was happening. 9 months of waiting, of feeling this child grow within her. And now the moment had arrived. By the time Silas returned with help, Clara was deep in the rhythm of labor. Mrs. Beecher took charge with the efficiency of a woman who delivered half the babies in the territory, while Doc Edison provided medical expertise and calm reassurance. "You're doing fine, Clara," he said during a brief respite between contractions. "Baby's positioned well. Just let nature take its course."
Easy for you to say,
she panted, squeezing Silas's hand hard enough to make him wince. He bore it without complaint, his face pale but determined. "You're the strongest woman I know," he murmured. "You can do this." "I rode into a gunfight 7 months pregnant," she managed between breaths. "I suppose I can do this too." The labor was long but uncomplicated. As snow piled against the windows and wind sang through the rafters, Clara brought their daughter into the world with a final push and a cry that was echoed by the baby's first breath. "A girl," Doc Edison announced, placing the squalling infant on Clara's chest. "Healthy and loud, definitely takes after her mother." Clara looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled and absolutely perfect.
Hello, Faith,
she whispered. "Welcome to Wyoming." Silas had tears streaming down his face as he touched his daughter's impossibly small hand.
She's beautiful. God, Clara, she's so beautiful.
"Of course she is," Mrs. Beecher said briskly, but her eyes were suspiciously moist. "With parents like you two, how could she be otherwise?" The weeks that followed were a blur of adjustment. Faith proved to be a good baby, nursing well and sleeping in reasonable stretches. Clara recovered quickly, her body strong from ranch work, and soon she was back to her normal routine with the addition of a baby strapped to her chest. Silas was besotted. The man who'd faced down outlaws without flinching turned to mush at his daughter's smallest coup. He'd sit for hours just holding her, telling her stories about her grandmother, about the land that would one day be hers. "You're spoiling her," Clara said one evening, finding him rocking Faith by the fire. "Impossible. She's only 6 weeks old, and already has you wrapped around her tiny finger." He grinned, unrepentant. "Wait until she's old enough to ride. I've already picked out a pony." Spring came early that year,
melting the snow and turning the prairie green with promise. The Mutual Protection Association had proven its worth through the winter, neighbors checking on each other, sharing resources, standing together against both natural and human threats. It was on a particularly fine May morning that Clara spotted riders approaching. Not the hurried pace of trouble, but not casual either. She called to Silas, who was working on a new corral. "Company coming, 3 riders." He joined her on the porch, Faith sleeping peacefully in her arms. As the riders drew closer, Clara recognized Sheriff Grant, accompanied by 2 men in suits, clearly not from around here. "Morning, folks," Grant said, dismounting. "These gentlemen are from the Territorial Governor's office. They have some news might interest you." The older of the 2 suited men stepped forward. "Mr. and Mrs. Boone, I'm Secretary William McKinley, aide to Governor Warren. We're here about Samuel Morrison and his associate, Andrew Johnson." Clara felt Silas tense beside her. "What about them?" "They're dead," McKinley said bluntly. "Morrison was killed in a prison riot 2 months ago. Johnson was shot trying to rob a bank in Denver last week." The words hung in the air like morning mist. Dead. Both of them. The threats that had shadowed their marriage from the beginning. Finally gone. "You're certain?" Silas asked quietly. "Quite certain. We've brought documentation. If you'd like to see it." McKinley's expression softened. "The governor wanted you to know personally. He's aware of the troubles you've faced, the attempts on your lives. He wanted to assure you that with these deaths, any claims against you or your property are permanently resolved." Clara found herself trembling, not with fear but with relief so profound it weakened her knees. "It's over, truly over." "Yes, ma'am. You're free to live your lives without looking over your shoulders." After the officials left, Silas and Clara stood on their porch, watching the dust of their departure settle. Faith stirred in Clara's arms, making small, hungry sounds. "I need to feed her," Clara said, but didn't move. "In a minute." Silas wrapped his arms around both of them. "Just let me hold you both for a minute." They stood there as the sun climbed higher, a family complete and finally, truly safe. The ghosts of their pasts had been laid to rest. The future stretched ahead, bright and full of possibility. That evening, as Clara prepared supper and Silas played with Faith on a blanket by the fire, she found herself thinking about the journey that had brought them here. A desperate woman fleeing Missouri, a lonely man haunted by violence, 2 broken souls who'd found each other across the vast distances of the frontier. "What are you thinking about?" Silas asked, noticing her distant expression. "About us, about how far we've come." She set down her spoon and joined them on the floor. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if Jeremiah hadn't written that letter, if I hadn't gotten on that stage? Every day." He caught her hand, brought it to his lips. "Every day I thank God for whatever brought you to me. You and Faith. You're my whole world. Clara. And you're ours." She leaned against him, watching their daughter grab at dust motes in the firelight. "Though I could have done with fewer gunfights along the way. It did get a bit exciting there for a while," he admitted. "But look what we built despite it all. A home, a family, a community that stands together." "A life," Clara added softly. "A good life." As if in agreement, Faith laughed her first real laugh, bright and pure as mountain water. Both parents froze, then scrambled for her attention, trying to coax another laugh from her. "Did you hear that?" Silas demanded. She laughed, Clara. She laughed. "I heard." Clara was laughing herself now, joy bubbling up from some deep well within. "Our daughter has your sense of timing, showing us her first laugh today of all days." They played with Faith until she tired. Then Clara nursed her to sleep while Silas read aloud from one of their books. It was a simple evening, unremarkable in most ways, but it held a peace they'd fought hard to achieve. Later, as they prepared for bed, Clara paused at the window. The moon was rising over the prairie, painting the land in silver. In the distance, she could see the lights of neighboring ranches, friends and allies in this hard but beautiful country. "Silas, would you change anything if you could go back?" He considered the question, joining her at the window. "My mother used to say that every trail we ride leads us where we need to be. The violent years, the loneliness, even the pain, it all led me to you. So no, I wouldn't change a thing. Even Morrison, even the fights and the fear. Especially those. They taught us how strong we are together, how much we're willing to fight for this life we've built." He turned her to face him. "What about you, any regrets?" Clara thought of Thomas, of the years of fear and pain, of the desperate flight to Wyoming, the terror of those first days. Then she thought of this man who'd shown her tenderness, of their daughter sleeping peacefully in the next room, of the home they'd created from prairie dust and determination. "No regrets," she said firmly. "Only gratitude." They stood together in the moonlight. Two people who'd found love in the most unlikely place. Outside, the wind sang its eternal song across the grasslands. Inside, their daughter slept safe and warm, dreaming whatever dreams babies dream. The past was buried. The future beckoned bright. And in the present, in a small ranch house on the vast Wyoming plain, the Boone family held each other close and counted their blessings. Clara thought again of that scared woman stepping off the stage in Cheyenne, meeting the eyes of a scarred stranger. She'd been running from one life, not knowing she was running toward another. Toward this moment, this man, this child, this perfect, imperfect life. "I love you, Silas Boone," she whispered. "And I love you, Clara May Boone, forever and always." In her cradle, Faith sighed in her sleep, safe in the knowledge that only comes to children who are truly loved. The fire burned low, casting dancing shadows on the walls. And somewhere in the distance, a coyote sang to the moon, its voice no longer lonely, but part of the great chorus of life on the frontier. They had survived. More than that, they had triumphed. Two broken people had built something whole and beautiful from the ashes of their pasts. The story that began with a letter and a desperate hope had found its perfect ending not in grand gestures or dramatic rescues, but in the quiet moments of a life well lived, in laughter and tears, in struggle and joy, in the simple act of choosing love over fear, every single day. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The ranch needed tending, the baby needed raising, the community needed building. But tonight, in their small circle of light against the darkness, all was well. And in the morning, when the sun painted the mountains gold and Faith woke with hungry cries, they would begin again. Together. Always together. The end. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope Clara and Silas's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine. Where are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let's share our thoughts about this tale of love, courage, and redemption in the American frontier. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Night, give this video a like, and hit that hype button to help more people discover these incredible tales of the Old West. Until next time, partners.